Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today we're talking all things from Friday's preseason victory over the Denver Nuggets, as well as a look at the week ahead as preseason wraps up, what to watch for with the final preseason games coming up here this week. That's all on the show today. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. First of all, thank you for making Locked On Wolves your very first listen every single day. And also remember that Locked On Wolves is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, as well as Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves preseason game day. The Wolves are in Los Angeles this evening to take on the LA Clippers in preseason game 3 out of 4. It's a 9:30 p.m. Central tip, a late preseason game that will be televised nationally on NBA TV. So we'll talk about all that here in a second. I also want to get into, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about Friday's show. We didn't do a true post-game podcast following Friday's, or I should say Friday's game, the victory over the Nuggets. But I want to kind of not recap it, but I guess put a bow on it, key takeaways, and then transition that into what to look for this week as preseason wraps up. We're only about 10 days, or I guess 9 days out from the regular season opener, the home game against the Rockets next Wednesday, the 20th. So a lot to look forward to as we get into the show today and throughout the week here. All right. So actually, let's start with the week ahead before we touch on the Nuggets game from Friday. So basically, Wolves Clippers this evening. That's Monday night, as I said, and then later this week, the Wolves head all the way across to the East Coast to take on the Brooklyn Nets. That's a 6:30 p.m. Central tip on Thursday the 14th, also broadcast on NBA TV. So the first two games are both Bally Sports North. These two games are both nationally broadcast on NBA TV. If you're looking to watch those, I would expect them to not be blacked out in the Twin Cities because I don't believe that Bally Sports is broadcasting them, but I'm not 100% sure. So check that if you live in the Twin Cities, but that's my understanding. So 9:30 p.m. on Monday, 6:30 on Thursday. In the meantime, the Timberwolves are practicing on the West Coast. They practice at USC over the weekend. That is, of course, the alma mater for Jordan Mclaughlin, who's a 4-year starter for the USC Trojans. And the Wolves are practicing in their gym this week. So in terms of Friday's game, I want to hit a couple high points real quickly here, and then we'll kind of transition into what did we see from last week's two preseason games that can help tip us off on what to watch for, what to look forward to for the two preseason games this week as we get closer and closer to real actual regular season Timberwolves basketball for the first time in, I guess it's only been 5 months, but it feels like a lot longer. Okay, so the high points from Friday for me, again, preseason game. If you're new to the podcast, what we typically do for post games in the regular season is I'll do kind of the game flow, the big points of the game, not a full recap, but basically what were the key points in the game? How did the game play out? And then I'll do key takeaways and individual studs and duds. I'll usually pick 3 studs and at least 1 or 2 duds for the Timberwolves who played well individually and who did not play well individually. This is obviously now a couple days removed from Friday's game. I'm not going to do a full preseason post-game pod format for this one. We'll probably do that after the Clippers game this evening, Monday night, for Tuesday's show. But today I just want to hit a couple of high points. So first of all, the Wolves starters did not play as well as they did in the first preseason game, which was a week ago, last Monday against the Pelicans. The starters really struggled in general. And I think they didn't score until almost 3 minutes into the game. They were down 21-8, only 8 minutes into the game. So I think they didn't get double figures in points until like the 3:41 mark in the first quarter, if I remember right. The offense was just generally not all that aggressive. Anthony Edwards didn't attempt a shot in the first quarter, and he didn't score until midway through the second quarter. D'Angelo Russell had a really tough time scoring the basketball after being just absolutely lights out on Monday against the Pelicans. Karl-Anthony Towns was really good. He took Nikola Jokic down in the post and scored on him a couple times and just had another really solid all-around game. We'll get into a couple of individual performances here in a second. But the Wolves got off to a really slow start in this game. They were down 7 at the end of the first quarter. They were only down 2 at halftime. The bench, again, came in, provided energy, which is what happened against the Pelicans on Monday as well. And then headed into the fourth, they were down 7 again. Ended up really, and this was the same sort of thing as the Pelicans game Monday in terms of rotation. And we'll talk about rotation moving forward here in a little bit when it comes to preseason. But head coach Chris Finch was not, obviously the Wolves are trying to win the game, but they're not putting starters or even first unit bench guys back into the game in the fourth quarter just to try to win a preseason game. So we're talking about a lineup towards, down the stretch where Jaylen Nowell and Leandro Balmaro are the ones running the offense. You had Nathan Knight in the front court. You had Jake Layman playing some minutes, although he wasn't, I don't think, on the court at the very end of the game. Or maybe he was, I guess. McKinley Wright was in the game at that point. Of course, last Monday, he had the big game-saving block that kept the Pelicans from tying the game last Monday night at the buzzer. But this was essentially Noel, Balmaro, and G League guys, frankly. And the Wolves were able to tie the game. Jaylen Nowell was great. He scored 6 points in the final, I think, minute of regulation, and then he scored 6 points in overtime and ultimately hit the game winner, had 12 points on 12 shots in just 13 minutes. So Jaylen Nowell, of course, he's going to get his shots up. He tied for the most field goal attempts in the entire roster in this game and only played 13 minutes, which, by the way, if you want a sense for how evenly split these minutes were distributed, the team's leading scorer was Malik Beasley. He only had 13 points. And it didn't feel like he had 13 points. He made only 1 3, so I think he's like 1 for 9 now over the first 2 preseason games from outside the arc. And but still was able to get 13 points in 20 minutes and led the team in scoring, which is an example of how thinly spread the minutes were from Chris Finch. Everyone played except for the training camp contract guys, with Chris Silva, Brian Bowen, Isaiah Miller, and Matt Lewis. Those guys, none of those guys saw the floor once again, but everybody else played, including both two-way guys, and everybody got into the game in this one. So I want to hit a couple of other key takeaways here next. And then again, transition into like, what does this tell us about this week? What should we be watching for in the games against the Clippers on Monday and the Nets on Thursday? So that's what we're going to do next. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Sleeper. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more games scheduled to play in that week are over. The days of mindless busy work are over. On a mindless daily busy week are completely over. The days of giving up halfway through the season because of that busy work also over. In Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. All of that adds up to more strategy and less of the dreaded busy work. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you play fantasy football, which I do, and I play, actually my dynasty league is through Sleeper. If you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you are going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. Let's also talk about our friends over at DirecTV Stream. Does this sound familiar? You've got a device that lets you catch the game live. And of course, now football season, everyone's watching DirecTV. Another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone. And maybe you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other quick takeaways from the game on Friday against the Nuggets. One is rotations, and I want to talk more about that here in terms of what to watch for moving forward. But I want to just touch on it related to Friday specifically. So clearly Chris Finch is not adhering to the rule of one of the best three offensive players on the court at all times, which is fair because it's preseason, right? So we're not seeing one of Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards sticking with the bench unit. It's almost hasn't been completely like hockey line shifts, but or hockey line changes, but kind of close to it at times. And again, this is more because it's about the minutes restrictions than it is about strict, lineup experimentation. Now we'll see how much, and the Wolves aren't the only team doing this, but it's interesting because once we get into the regular season, that's when you'll get a real sense for which lineups are working. Maybe it's diminishing returns at this point if they were to try and, spend more time figuring out these lineup combinations and playing these guys more minutes, because the opposing team isn't at full strength either. They're not playing their true defense as they would in the regular season either. There's so many different variables involved that it probably is just safer to approach it like the Wolves are, which is restricting minutes in a really smart way, right? So we saw guys play 17, 18 minutes. The starters play 17, 18 minutes in the preseason opener. They were 20, 22 minutes this time around. I would expect on Monday in Los Angeles against the Clippers, they're in the 25 to 28 range, and then perhaps it's more normal in the fourth game. But like, for instance, like Torian Prince has been basically, I think he was the first guy off the bench in both preseason games so far. No idea what his role is going to be once we get into the regular season, but the fact that he's so flexible in terms of his position, he can play the 3 or the 4. He can guard 2s and some 5s even, and he's one of the better shooters on the team from outside the arc. He's going to be a really important piece of how Finch puts together his rotations, and I don't know that we really know how he's going to be used yet. All we know is that Finch loves his versatility. The Wolves are going to move him around a little bit, especially defensively, and that's what we know so far. So again, I wouldn't read too much into the rotations based on what we saw last week in the first 2 preseason games, and same moving forward. Although I would think it's going to start to get closer to where it'll ultimately end up. Once we get into the final 2 preseason games this week. My last takeaway is just one player specifically who has been really impressive through 2 preseason games. That's Josh Kogi. His defense is more like Josh Kogi of 2 years ago than Josh Kogi of last year. I think last year, his extreme offensive issues really kind of ate into what he was able to provide defensively. I mean, remember rookie season, Okogie's basically defined by the block on James Harden on national TV. I think it was an ESPN game, big block on a 3-point attempt of James Harden down the stretch in that game, and fantastic defense overall on James Harden. And that was kind of his MO then, right? And then year 2, a lot, similar. I think he improved a little bit shooting the ball outside the arc. Generally was a little better as a sophomore than it was as a rookie. Last year, his offense regressed so much. And I blame that obviously partly on Kogi and partly on the situation that Ryan Saunders and the Timberwolves coaching staff put him in. He was being expected to do more offensively than he probably should have been. Certainly more than he should have been. Whether that be stand in the corner and knock down open corner threes. I mean, that's maybe not too much to ask of a starting wing in the NBA in today's game, but that's simply not what Josh Kogi does well. There's 2 games in particular last year that stand out to me. One was the first game in Oklahoma City. I think it's a game the Wolves actually won, but Kogi had a couple of really bad turnovers early in that game. I think he ended up playing very few minutes, and this was when Saunders was still coaching. He got pulled and didn't play very much late in the game. But he had one like really bad turnover where it was almost like you were watching like a high school game where he got stuck like right outside the paint. And he pivoted in a circle like twice and then ultimately turned the ball over or got a shot blocked or something. That was a really bad game for Josh. And then there was a second game not long after that. I believe it was Golden State on the road when it was either Golden State or the Clippers, where they literally left him completely open outside the arc on like 5 straight possessions. They were intentionally sagging off of him to the point where they were almost packing the paint. And he missed every single shot. And ultimately, I think he airballed one of his 3-point attempts, and he didn't play much the rest of that game either. I think that his offensive struggles, and again, in part because of the positions he was being put into by his coaching staff and really his coaching staff, that affected him defensively. Now, don't get me wrong. Josh Kogi was still a good defender last year, but he was not a great defender. He was not the same defender we saw 2-3 years ago. So once Chris Finch took over last season, we saw Kogi playing more and more in horn sets at the elbow. We saw him playing more and more in the dunker spot, similar to how the Wolves use Jared Vanderbilt offensively. Kogi's a good screener, and he's a pretty solid roller and cutter as well. He can score in the paint. He's athletic. He can make free throws well enough when he gets to the free throw line. And we saw Finch use him a lot in a lot more, or I guess just a lot more smartly, if that makes sense. He was smarter in the way that he used Josh Kogi than the previous coaching staff had been. And we got to see him, perk up a little bit on both ends of the floor. Now, so far this preseason, we've definitely seen that. His defense is back to where we've wanted to see it, where we saw it in the past. He's got a total of 4 steals and 3 blocks between the first 2 preseason games and 36 total minutes. I mean, that's 4 steals, 3 blocks in 36 minutes. That's fantastic. He's also made 6 of his 9 shot attempts from the field. He made a corner 3 last time out as well. I think he's probably not in the starting lineup on opening night. He could be. I mean, he started the first preseason game, but he's going to have a role in this rotation. And, maybe eventually Leandro Balmaro takes his rotation spot basically as a bigger wing, but it's not going to happen early in the season. I think Kogi's got the rotation spot pretty much locked down. We just need to see him continue to show confidence at both ends of the floor. And it was great to see that again from Josh on Friday and through 2 preseason games. To me, he's been the most impressive player relative to expectations. Obviously, Towns has been great. D'Lo had 1 great game and 1 bad game. Balmaro has been exciting. Jaylen Nowell's had moments. McKinley Wright's played great defense. Like, there's lots of things to shout out. But to me, relative to expectations and what we saw last year, Josh Kogi has really been the best, the most impressive player to me through 2 preseason games. We'll see if he can continue that this week. Okay. I want to finish the show today by talking about what to watch for in the final 2 preseason games. The things that you should keep an eye on. Again, it's great the Wolves are 2-0, but we're not focusing on wins and losses in the preseason, obviously. So we're going to get into those things, what to watch for this week in the games against the Nets and the Clippers here in just a second. First, though, let's talk about our outstanding friends over at Built Bar. Did you know that Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar of all time? It tastes exactly like a candy bar. I have a Built Bar every single day on my way home from work. They're delicious. Any flavor with coconut, any flavor with brownie, whether it's mint brownie or, whatever, anything with caramel, cookies and cream is fantastic. If you want to just try a couple different flavors out, or to be more exact, 9 flavors, go ahead and get a mix box. You'll get 2 of each of the 9 staple flavors of Built Bar. Not only do they taste delicious, but they're healthy for you as well. Check out the macros: 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to just 180 calories per bar, and only 4 or 5 grams of sugar and just 4 to 5 grams net carbs. Every single flavor tastes amazing, and they're all healthy. Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at builtbar.com. All right, let's put a bow on the first week of preseason, look ahead to the second week of preseason. We're now moving out of the training camp phase and into just practices, preseason games. And then there's like a 6-day break between the final preseason game and the Wolves' first regular season game. So here's what we need to watch this week. The first thing is tighter rotations. I alluded to this earlier, that we can't read too much into like Prince being the first guy off the bench and Mclaughlin getting into the game early in the second quarter, because we don't know if that's what regular season Timberwolves rotation is going to look like. Like, for instance, Patrick Beverley only played 11 minutes in the game on Friday off the bench. Jordan Mclaughlin played 17. That's obviously not what we're going to see once we get into the regular season, but Pat Bev doesn't need to play 18 minutes a game in preseason. Even with a new team, it's just not necessary. So I think we can read into it a little bit. Like, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, Prince's versatility, how the Wolves may use him, the pairings in the backcourt that Chris Finch has tried. But I think we can look for the rotations to start to tighten up. He was asked post-practice, I think maybe it was last Thursday or leading into Friday's game. He was asked about approaching the preseason, with 4 games. Obviously, the NFL typically has 4 preseason games. I think they cut back to 3 this year. But oftentimes in the NFL, if you're not familiar, the first game is kind of like, a lot of young guys play. The middle 2 are kind of, maybe the starters play a half of a quarter or something, maybe a full quarter. And then the fourth one is like, or I guess usually it's the third one, is the dress rehearsal, right? Where you have maybe your starters play the whole first half and you want to kind of see how your team rolls. Then the final preseason game would be more of like, hey, let's not get anybody hurt. Let's play the young guys, figure out the back end of the roster. Chris Finch was asked if he would think about approaching the preseason that way. He basically said no, it's just in terms of minutes limitations. So if it was the NFL model, we would see Monday as the dress rehearsal, right? We might see 30 plus minutes from Cat, whatever. Don't expect to see that. It sounds like they're just going to continue to inch minutes upward. So we may see after 22 minutes from the starters, basically, Yeah, between 22 and 24 minutes for all the starters on Friday. Maybe we're seeing 26 to 30 minutes max, probably 26 to 28 minutes on Monday. And then maybe it ramps up a little more Thursday with 6 days to rest and recover and practice ahead of next Wednesday's regular season opener. So I would more expect to see the minutes to increase incrementally than I would to see tighter rotations in like an actual regular season sense. You're not going to see the rotation shortened to 9 or 10 guys. That said, I think it will be interesting to see if we get to see extended minutes for some of these backcourt pairings. If we get to see maybe even a different starting lineup. We saw 2 different starting lineups last week. Are they going to continue shuffling guys in and out? I think that'll be interesting to watch. I don't know that the rotations will actually be tighter. I think we'll just see slightly increased minutes for the guys that will be on the court the most once the season starts. Related to that, though, Jordan Mclaughlin and Jaylen Nowell, I think it'll be interesting to see what their roles are moving forward. Mclaughlin, as I said a minute ago, has really, he's come off the bench pretty early in these games and has seen a fair amount of minutes. He played 17 minutes on Friday, and he was good. He had 10 points on 4 or 6 shooting, made both of his 3-point attempts. And the Wolves obviously really like him. But what is his role? Right? Patrick Beverley's the de facto backup point guard, although he's not going to initiate a ton of offense with the second unit. I think we're going to see a lot more of Anthony Edwards running with the second unit and initiating offense, or we might see, in preseason, it's been a lot of Jordan Mclaughlin. We've seen Mclaughlin and Patrick Beverley on the floor together. Are the Wolves planning to play Beverley, Mclaughlin, and D'Angelo Russell all as part of the regular rotation? Are they going to play a 10-man rotation with no Bolmaro in the rotation and no Jaylen Nowell, and maybe McLaughlin's the 10th guy, and he plays more than I was expecting him to play? That's a real possibility. Jaylen Nowell's an interesting one too, because anytime he gets on the floor, he seems to end up scoring. And he did take 12 shots in 13 minutes on Friday, but generally speaking, he's a pretty efficient 3-level scorer. He can handle the ball. He can initiate offense like he did in Summer League in Las Vegas this summer. And he also has been more active in both Summer League and so far in preseason defensively. He had 2 steals and a block on Friday. We saw him put forth more effort defensively in Summer League, which has been his biggest issue. Now, he's probably the 11th guy in the rotation, right? McLaughlin's probably 10, and it's either Noel or Bolmaro that's going to end up being 11th in the Timberwolves rotation to start the season. And if Bolmaro ends up going to the G League, which is very likely, Noel is probably on the regular season roster and on the fringes of the rotation. I'm curious to see if they find a way to get him a few minutes here and there to try and kind of keep him fresh. He's the type of guy who you don't want him coming off, if they end up needing him in week 3 of the season after not playing the first 2 weeks, what's that going to be like for Jaylen Nowell coming in cold? How's he going to play himself into the rotation? He's the type of guy where I feel like if you get him a few minutes a night here and there, he could be more effective down the road. And I've obviously been bullish on Noel for a while. I think he will be a very good rotation NBA player, likely a reserve type, 6-man type is probably his ceiling, but he can score the basketball, and the Wolves will need somebody to do that off the bench at some point this season. And of course, the way he finished the game on Friday was fantastic. The other thing is Malik Beasley, how the Wolves are using him. He's come off the bench in each of the first 2 games. Maybe he gets a shot at the starting lineup on Monday in LA. I thought all along he would be a starter, but Finch's comments recently, I talked about this on, I think, Friday's show, really allude to the fact that Beasley may be better suited with the current group that the Timberwolves have coming off the bench once the season starts. So I think he probably will come off the bench both games this week, but you never know. He ended up playing, leading the team in scoring, 13 points in 20 minutes in Friday's game, and he shot the ball a little better than he did in the first game, 13 points, 3 rebounds, 5 of 12 shooting, 1 of 5 outside the arc. So he has struggled from deep so far this preseason, but in both games, he's been active as a cutter and has gotten to the free throw line, which is something he doesn't do a ton of normally. So he's looked good outside of his 3-point shooting struggles over the past couple of games. So I guess the only 2 games so far, the preseason games. But outside of the 3-point shooting, he's looked solid. So I'm curious to see what he looks like this week and how the Wolves use him, what kind of minutes distribution he gets, and what lineups he plays with. And so that's directly related to my final thing, which is the starting lineup. I had been saying throughout the offseason that I think the starting lineup is probably D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Anthony Edwards, Jared Vanderbilt, Karl-Anthony Towns. Now it's starting to seem like Edwards plays the 2, and it'll either be a Kogi at the 3 or McDaniels at the 3 with Vanderbilt at the 4. Or if it's a Kogi at the 3, it's possibly McDaniels at the 4. And maybe Vando and Malik Beasley come off the bench. And maybe I was wrong on what, 40% of the starting lineup. We'll see how this thing shakes out. We've seen 2 starting lineups in 2 games. Will it Will it be a third different one on Monday? Will it be one of the two from last week? But the Wolves do have legitimate depth this year. They've got 7 guys that are worthy of starting, and they've got probably 12 rotation worthy guys, and they're going to have a 9 or 10 man rotation. And that's just how this is going to work this year. So it doesn't really matter who starts. It matters who finishes, right? Like, for instance, if Vanderbilt ends up starting the game, I don't think he's finishing the game at the 4. I think he's your starting 4. Unless you're really struggling to rebound the ball or Towns is out because of foul trouble or something. Vando's probably not in your closing lineup because of his offensive limitations. I think, McDaniels is probably your closing 4. And if Josh Kogi starts, I don't think you can really have him on the floor unless you're going offense, defense at the end of a close game. I think he's probably your starting 3, and then you close with either D'Lo and Patrick Beverley. That's most likely what it is in the backcourt. So Pat Bev can play, it could take the toughest perimeter assignment. McDaniels is your 4. So you've got both Beverley and McDaniels on the floor defensively. Or you find a way to get Beasley on the floor. If Edwards improves defensively, Beasley and Edwards are on the floor together with D'Lo. Now you're going to have some problems defensively there, but again, if Edwards shows that strides, he continues to improve on that end of the floor, that's feasible. So again, I think it's more the finishing lineup, the closing, the crunch time lineup than it is the starting lineup that we need to be concerned about. But I'm more curious than anything else to see what the starting lineup looks like when it comes to Wednesday the 20th against the Houston Rockets. So we'll keep an eye on that throughout the week, and obviously discuss it following the game Monday. Which brings me to my last point, which is after the game Monday night, a late game, 9:30 p.m. Central tip against the Clippers. I will have a post-game podcast that will post in the middle of the night, so probably after midnight. So technically Tuesday morning here, local time in the Central time zone. That will be Tuesday's podcast. It will be a post-game pod. Go ahead and give it another run at an actual post-game pod with the game flow, key takeaways, and studs and duds. So we will have that for you early on Tuesday, late Monday, early Tuesday. Be sure, if you're not already following or subscribed to the podcast, that you do that. And a big thank you to those of you that are regular listeners for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Remember, free and available on all platforms, and that includes YouTube now. We're almost 2 months into YouTube. So be sure, if you're not subscribed there, that you do that. You like this video, give it the thumbs up. Definitely appreciate it. And I can't express that enough. You can also listen, if you prefer to listen, on Apple, Google, Spotify, or the all-new Odyssey app. You can do that. Be sure you're also following on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. That's at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. Friendly reminder, I did not set up that Twitter handle. If I did, there would not have been a T in it, but that's where we're at. So be sure you put the T in there. Locked On T-Wolves, and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thanks once again for listening to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.